Hi, McCracken. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored to have you on as a guest. Before you came on here, I was doing a little research. I thought, oh, this looks like an interesting book. Thought perhaps it's fiction, and then I'm reading it's not fiction, but then I go deeper and deeper and do some Google searching. And well, anyway, I'll let you tell all that story because it's fascinating. We'll get to that book. But first, tell us about yourself, where you're from, and what do you do for a living, and just who you are, and what caused you to write this book.
Well, that's going to be a one podcast just to answer those questions. But my name is McCracken Poston Jr. I'm a lawyer in Northwest Georgia, just below Chattanooga, Tennessee, just below that line. I actually practice in both Georgia and Tennessee, licensed in two states. And I have gone around the country on what they call ProHack admission, where I would get admitted for a case by case basis. But I started out in politics. I was more interested in public service than I was being in a courtroom. And I served for 4 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives, the state legislature. Uh, I developed type 1 insulin dependent diabetes while I was there. And looking back, it was one of the best things to ever happen to me because it gave me a sense of my own mortality for the first time. And it changed me as a public servant. It changed me as a legislator, and I passed a number of significant reforms in Georgia at the state level. One was to require lobbyists to register and report the gifts that they gave to us legislators, which you can imagine did not make me the
Mhm.
most popular under the gold
No.
dome of Georgia's Capitol, but it was extremely popular outside of the gold dome of Atlanta. So after a couple of years of reform efforts, I ran for the United States Congress and was destroyed in that race. I was beaten so soundly it it beat the politics out of me, and that's where this book actually begins. Is I'm a bit lost. I lost a congressional race. I lost a marriage, and I lost had somewhat of a major appointment dangled out in front of me, and that got lost as well. So I was just in a very low place, but I tried to put my life together, tried to put my law practice back together, which I never had done much of it because I was so into what I was doing in Atlanta. And in our small town, which has about less than 4,000 people population, um, there was a very odd gentleman that I'd known just about all my life. He went to high school with my oldest sister. He ran a TV dealership, a Zenith dealership. His name was Alvin Ridley. But Alvin became very odd and unusual um, in later years. He became litigious. He had these outrageous causation theories of how he was done wrong by people, and he would sue. And in one instance, he was countersued, and the counterclaimant seized his van, or had the county seize his van, a Chevy van. Well, he had other vehicles, but to him, this was the high point of government conspiracy against him. And he shut his business down out of protest, ran for sheriff in our county, and just seemed to be a malcontent gadfly that people called crazy. They just said, "Man, he's lost it." Um, Interestingly enough, in the sheriff's race, where he was not considered a serious candidate, he considered himself a very serious candidate. And I was already interested in politics. I was just two short 2-year cycles, or 1 4-year period away from running myself. So I really wanted to watch this all candidates rally on the courthouse steps in 1984. So I hung around to watch it. That was high entertainment where I'm from, is campaign season and listening to candidates. Alvin mounted the steps of the courthouse, and I could tell this crowd was ready to just jeer and ridicule and have fun with him. He pulled out a tape recorder and he turned it on. And it was you'll remember this more than younger people will, when TVs used to sign off at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They didn't run 24/7. They actually went off the air a lot of times just with a test pattern.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, down here anyway,
They played
the
the
national
anthem.
anthem
Yeah.
was played.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
national anthem was played at the end of the day.
Same here. Yeah.
Alvin recorded that,
Mhm.
and for the first 2 minutes of his talk, which was, I think, limited to 5 minutes, he played the national anthem from that tape.
Cool.
Well, his detractors were immediately confused because they didn't want to seem unpatriotic. So they all had to take their caps off and
Yeah.
stand respectfully. So I thought, whoever this guy is, he's always been odd. And I know my sister went to school with him. I know my dad trades with him, does business with him. But whoever he is, that was pretty smart. He reset that whole lawn full of people
Yeah. Yeah.
who were ready to tear into him, and suddenly he was leading them and showing respect for the flag and the country. And when at the end of the national anthem, ultimately the jeers and the heckles started again, but it was a lot less.
Right.
So I
Right.
was impressed with the guy.
Sure.
Well, fast forward to 1996, and I'm destroyed in my race. Well, 11 months later, Alvin Ridley goes to a phone booth and says, "My wife's not breathing." Well, the problem is nobody in town knew he had a wife.
Yeah.
That was the first problem. The second problem, her surviving family started speculating very publicly and in tabloid type publications that he had kept her locked in the basement for 30 years. And then he just snapped and killed her. Well, that information was delivered to the state crime lab as if it were fact, and it was not fact. But the state crime lab medical examiner opted to call this homicide, even knowing that Virginia Ridley suffered all her life from epilepsy. She also suffered from reactions to the epilepsy medicine on occasion. And, but Alvin was not doing himself any good. He was being very elusive. He was, to the investigators, he was not showing the appropriate emotion for a guy whose wife just died, who just lost his wife and best friend of 30 plus years. And they thought he had a very flat effect of his voice when he called in the 911 number. And he was an extremely difficult client, John. And I began to explore, only in writing the book, why we were such a conflicting pair. In the book, I didn't expect to be writing about this, but in doing the research, because the trial was in 1999, January of 1999. I started writing soon thereafter, but I just could not explain Alvin Ridley. We gave away the story to Forensic Files, the TV show, American Justice with Bill Curtis, that TV show, NPR's Snap Judgment podcast, People Magazine did a feature on it. The Washington Post did a front page feature. All of them just kind of left it as this eccentric guy, Alvin Ridley.
Right.
That never satisfied me in terms of writing. But anybody that wanted the story, we would line up and tell them. We would be very willing to cooperate. And so there's a lot of tellings of this story out there. But finally, a podcaster out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, was interviewing people about it. And one of our jurors had later become a nurse in Alaska. And she reached out through him to me and said, "Have you ever considered that Alvin may be on the autism spectrum?" Well, this is 22 years after the trial.
Right.
And it hit me like a cold glass of water in the face.
Sure.
That absolutely explained. But John, 25 years ago, nobody was talking about autism in adults.
Really? Hmm.
The spectrum had just been announced as a theory of
Okay.
people plotting all over a spectrum with
Yeah.
autism.
Yeah.
There was a hyper focus on school children and a hyper focus on finding a cause and blaming this, that, or the other for it.
Right.
Well, in reality, we've had people with autism probably as long as there have been human beings. The some of our greatest contributors in the arts, in science, and in just about every walk of life have been brilliant persons on the autism spectrum. And of course, it is a spectrum. There are people with deep disability from it, nonverbal type situations. But it also explained Alvin's brilliance as a TV repairman.
Repairman, yeah. Sure.
He was, without a doubt, he was unparalleled in his ability to fix an old picture tube TV.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is the technology changed.
Yeah.
Around the time in the 80s, when he suddenly shuttered his business and closed, blaming the taking of his van as and his father had wrecked in a minor accident the company truck, so he was dependent on that van. Well, he stalked me until I agreed to advise him, and then he wouldn't come to my office. He wouldn't make an appointment. We just went into this cycle of conflict. Now, in writing the book, by now, in 3 years ago, Alvin was diagnosed with being
Okay.
very much on the autism spectrum, is how the doctor put it.
Yeah.
And it explains so much to me. The beauty of it is the whole town has warmed up to him now, because with his permission, I shared it.
Okay.
And now we almost all know someone with
Yeah.
autism,
Sure.
usually a younger person.
Yeah.
And because of that, we all understand Alvin better.
Mm-hmm.
And in response to that, he has lightened up a great deal. He is not just scowling and staring at people constantly, and he's really working on his social skills, and he's really having the time of his life with this book out. He
Mm-hmm.
likes to sign them. He likes to appear
Cool.
with me at signings and sign them.
Cool.
And he in a lot of ways, he never left our town. He went to the Army, served our country for 2 years in the Army, but then he came back. He never really left. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we launched our book at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, and we had a full room, but it was probably 200 to 220 people. Well, Alvin is telling everyone that he spoke to 300,000 people in Atlanta. And so, I'm thinking, man, if I could only get a small percentage of them to buy the book.
That's right. Yeah.
But this is the book. That's Alvin. and that's the elusive Virginia in a photo booth at Lake
Right,
Winnipesaukee
one of those
Amusement
photo
Park
booth shots, yeah.
in Catoosa County, Georgia.
In
And that was just before they married. They met. He was in the Army. He came home on leave. She was from near here in another town in Georgia. But it was a love story. They married. They got their wedding license 3 weeks after country music star Dolly Parton and her husband came to Ringgold, Georgia to get married. Situated in the northwest corner of the state, we were the quickie marriage go-to places from Birmingham and Nashville and Knoxville, Tennessee, and western South Carolina and western North Carolina and all of Georgia. It was a one-stop shopping blood test license ceremony.
Yep.
Because of that, people flocked to Ringgold, Georgia to get married. Dolly Parton and Carl Dean, going against her manager's advice, slipped down here and got married. 3 weeks later, Alvin and Virginia get their license and later marry. And this was, both those marriages were in 1966. By the time George Jones and Tammy Wynette came to Ringgold to get married in 1969, Virginia was missing. She was missing. And her parents, bless their hearts, they put out newspaper articles that she was missing. Last seen with her husband, Alvin Ridley. Well, if that isn't an insult to this young couple who were keeping a household in a public housing development. They were very proud of their 2-bedroom apartment. But Virginia's parents were very religious, and this was in a day when our county was dry. You could not buy a drop of alcohol, legal alcohol in the county. But of course, we had the cheat of a state line in Chattanooga, just a couple of miles away. So it was kind of ridiculous that we had those rules and laws because Tennessee was getting everybody's money.
Yeah.
But they were afraid that this Army man was corrupting their daughter, and they raided the apartment looking for beer. They didn't find any, but it so offended the young couple that they just shut them out. And before you know it, 1970 happened, and the Ringgold Housing Authority was evicting Alvin and Virginia Ridley because of an incident where an exterminator came into the apartment while she was bathing and then lingered and asked her out. The way the Ridleys fought was they just slipped her away from the apartment during the days that they feared that the exterminator might run. Okay. And then it started just taking her out of the apartment every day and letting her stay with either his parents or different elderly people around the community, all of whom were gone by the time the trial came. But 1970 happened. Her parents basically caused an eviction. And that was the end of it for Virginia. She was so upset. The judge stopped the eviction because Alvin was making a complete circus of it on his own, by himself, representing himself. And the judge said, "Mr. Ridley, send for your wife. I need to see your wife." So that revealed all this eviction was about was flushing Virginia out. Alvin's father went and got her. She went back into chambers with the judge and her parents and Alvin's father. Alvin was not even allowed to go. And she told her parents, for later reports, that she was where she wanted to be with her husband. And she never spoke to them again. So 27 years later, though, she's dead. freshly dead in the bed, Alvin having discovered her face down in the bed after she had earlier in the evening what Alvin called a spell, which meant a seizure. So it was an odd situation, but Alvin had made such a mess of his relations with local government, he was too easy a target. And so they began to investigate. He sought me out just a couple of days later, but he didn't seem to want to sit down and talk about his wife. All he wanted to talk about was the county taking his van 15 years before.
Yeah.
And all this ancient litigation. Well, ultimately, I started representing him. I thought by appointment at first, but he had too many assets to have an appointed lawyer. And so I began to try to work with him. Only when I was writing the book and going back into my past and did I remember, and looking at my mother's own journals, my late mother's journals, did I remember that my family and I were doing an intervention with our father around this time. He was a wonderful man, a loving father, never was abusive to us or our mother, provided for us very well as a foundryman in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But he was pitifully alcoholic. And the way that affects the child, I really didn't know. I know that as soon as I could get alcohol, I started drinking. And that was at a very young age. And I ran around with my friends who, interestingly enough, their fathers also had drinking issues. And so that was my crowd. And that's just, I think that was my role model. That's what I thought men did. And so I'm realizing as I'm writing this that I have been a miserable, neurotic micromanager about just about everything. That's what happens to a child when they're an adult child of an alcoholic parent. We do everything to keep everything on an even keel.
Right.
And that might include barking out orders and just making sure everybody is acting right and smooth sailing. That's the absolute worst person to pair with a neurodivergent person. And so Alvin and I were like oil and water. We were not jihawing, as they say around here.
Yeah.
He was an extremely difficult client. I thought maybe I should walk away because this is just too much. Looking at the ancient civil litigation that he filed, he seemed to always start with a lawyer and then they would walk away, or he would get mad and fire them and take it on his own and make a mess of things.
Of course.
But he did make me study this ancient litigation, and I realized, and I was shocked to find that the van that he focused all of his conspiracy theories around, the taking of his van in 1984, he on his own appealed and got the van back in 3 weeks. But he hasn't touched it yet because he says touching it will trigger a statute of limitations. So this van at that time was sitting still on, increasingly flat tires for 15 years. This year, it will be 40 years that he still has not touched this 1977 Chevy van. Now there are trees growing up on all sides of it. Now, I feel like the trees are going to lift it up into the air at some point.
Sure.
But that's Alvin's somewhat logical, fanciful thinking.
Yeah.
That if I touch it, then that means, I'm going to have to act fast to sue them. So if I don't touch it yet, I can take my time. And when I realized that, I thought, what in the world? Why do I need to be putting myself through this? And then the congressman called. And this is the guy that just completely destroyed my political ambitions. And Alvin seemed impressed that my secretary said that the congressman had called me. And I realized more and more I knew him that Alvin, for every ounce of suspicion he had about local and state government, he had a counterweight tenfold of hope in federal government. And it turns out Virginia did too.
Hmm.
They felt like the federal government was going to be their salvation. So I thought, well, I'll call the congressman back while Alvin's in the room. He seems to be all impressed that I got a call from the congressman. So I pick up the phone and put it to my ear. Congressman, how are you doing? He said, basically ordered, keep Alvin Ridley away from my congressional offices. He's scaring the ladies there. Well, I immediately thought, if I just bark an order to Alvin, do not go to that congressional office anymore, he's going to lump me in with everybody else that is ordering him to stay away. So I just didn't think that would be the way to handle this. So I asked Alvin to go outside with me so we could talk. And he thought it was odd because we couldn't talk in my office, but we went outside and I said, Alvin, that damn congressman, Alvin, he hates me so much. Alvin looked very confused. And I said, the election. Well, Alvin looked even more confused because even Alvin knew that I had gotten destroyed, didn't even carry my own county. So I said, he hates me so much that he said, if you or I ever go to his congressional offices, either one of us, he's going to have us both arrested. And Alvin, I can't afford to be arrested. So can you let's just help me help you with this case. Let's leave the congressman out of it. And I was looking around and I said, and if you do this, and when this is all over with, I'll show you where he lives. It was a hollow threat. It was a hollow threat.
Sure.
But I wanted Alvin to think, oh yeah, we'll go see him. When this is all over with, we'll petition right up to his door.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, I liked my congressman's family. He had a wonderful wife, wonderful kids. I was not planning on taking Alvin to his house, but I wanted Alvin to feel like he was not having the door slammed in his face,
right.
that we had a plan. And it worked. And I thought, this is the way to handle Alvin.
Yeah.
I never say you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just think of a better way to do it.
Yeah.
Alvin he would get so amped up about this van story. And I would get amped up saying, we've got to talk about your wife. I have to know facts about your wife. He wouldn't let me in his house. For over a year of advising and representing him, he would not let me in his house. So I would get so amped up and he would as well. And we'd start yelling at each other. And at some point, the word van came in and I just said, oh Lord. Alvin went completely silent. He thought I was praying. And he's respectful enough that he went into a prayer position. His eyes closed very tightly. And I thought, I could work with this. And so I prayed my legal advice to him that day.
Oh,
he listened.
Pretty good, yeah.
And at the end of it, when I also added, and Lord, please let Alvin let me in his house, that's when he immediately snapped out of it and he said, I'll think about it, which was Alvin's put off for me all the time. Well, ultimately, we started rocketing toward trial and I had nothing because he wouldn't let me in his house. He wouldn't talk about his wife. He made me study this ancient civil litigation, including the eviction. I was so resentful of him, but I kept thinking that congressman's call inspired me. We were like in another election now. And my former opponent, now he was kind of down on Alvin Ridley. Now I'm Alvin Ridley's protector. And it inspired me. It motivated me to work harder to try to get Alvin to work with me. Ultimately, though, we had nothing. So in October of 1998, a year had passed since Alvin reported Virginia's death in his very flat, monotone voice. We're rocketing toward a trial, and I got nothing. I did get a gift of 45 new witnesses from the DA, which meant it gave me an excuse to ask for a continuance. Said, Judge, I can't I can't interview 45 witnesses in this short a time. And the judge granted a brief continuance of until early January. So I was so relieved. I was about to turn 39, and threw myself, I had remarried in the meantime, threw myself a big party, drank like I always did. But middle of the night, I'm kind of cleaning up the place, and I have CNN on. And CNN starts talking about the Olympic track star Florence Griffith Joyner, or FloJo as we called her, who had died unexpectedly the month before. They announced that she had died of a seizure disorder. Well, one of the things the state of Georgia was basing homicide on was the presence of petechial hemorrhages around her eyes, little tiny broken blood vessels around her eyes and mouth, that the science indicated they should not jump to the conclusion of homicide with those. People can get them.
They thought it was a beating.
No, they thought she had been suffocated.
Oh, suffocated.
And this suffocation or soft strangulation had caused the blood vessels to burst.
Okay.
The artery going down away from your head is closer to the surface. So when somebody is strangled, and then the excitement, they're continuing to pump blood excitedly into the head, and now it can't get out of the head.
I got it. Yeah. Sure.
So it starts rupturing. But this also can happen in a strong coughing fit of a person with a certain type of skin, or a seizure, quite a common seizure that can happen. So suddenly now I had an example of an epilepsy death, because they're quite rare.
Okay.
Virginia, of course, was not medicating because it had been years since she'd seen a doctor. So there's a syndrome of sudden death in epilepsy that can happen if you're not medicating or sub-medicating. And this is 1998 internet. I'm having to handwrite the URLs that I'm seeing, that I'm looking on abstracts that I can't cut and paste. So I'm having to write down these long strings of backslashes and what have you. But I find this common name in all the abstracts about dying with epilepsy. And the name is Dr. Braxton Bryant Wanamaker of Orangeburg, South Carolina. Well, I found him on the phone. He agreed with me that jumping to the conclusion of homicide just because of petechial hemorrhages in an epilepsy patient, no less, that was irresponsible. And so he agreed that I could hire him to be a witness in the case. Well, we marched forward, and still that's all I had. So Thanksgiving comes, and my parents, who liked Alvin, he went to school with my oldest sister. He was always very polite around parents, I think. And he was our TV guy. So my dad had done business with him, and my dad kind of bartered some sharpening of lawnmower blades or something that they had worked out together. My parents wrapped up some Thanksgiving leftovers, and they said, we want you to take this to Alvin. And I did not want to. I just thought, this is my day off. I've got a
Yeah.
few more weeks. I got nothing in this case. The guy won't cooperate. But okay, my parents asked me to do it. I just drove my new wife home, and then I drove back to Alvin's house and knocked on the door. And he came to the door. He's usually very guarded about that kind of thing. I had tried to get in his house when I was getting a phone installed for him, paying for it so that he could call me. And he decided at the last minute to have the phone installed on the porch to keep me and the installer from going in the house.
Yeah. Jeez.
But I handed him this food. And I learned later that Alvin is very transactional. And I think he felt like he needed to give me something. And he said, just a minute. And then he came back and opened the door and said, come on in. And I went into a very strange house. There were a lot of things like stuffed animals and things that were in this very dark room. It was a simple house of a person of low economic status because there was a bed in the living room, and that's because the main heat source was in the living room.
Yeah.
And they had gone to live with Alvin's parents after the eviction from public housing. And Alvin's parents had died over the years, one by one. And so now this couple, no longer young, they lived in that living room still. Well, on one wall, covering an entire wall, were writings. And when my eyes could finally adjust and I could see them, they seemed to be in somewhat of a feminine handwriting, cursive handwriting, with very distinctive flares on the lower reaching letters, like the Y in Ridley had a very common flourish to it. And some of her, the heights of some of the letters, I was told by a handwriting analyst, were very distinctive. Well, I said, Alvin, who wrote this? And my heart was beating. I was hoping it was her. And he said, well, Virginia did. And I said, what compelled her to write so much, just mundane things? He said, I guess the Lord told her to write it. And I said, well, is there more? And he takes me into a room where it is floor to ceiling cardboard boxes, just laden with Virginia's writings. They never threw anything away.
Wow.
As it turned out, and we only learned this the night before I put my epilepsy expert on the stand, he said, is there anything unusual about this woman that you have determined? And I said, yeah, she couldn't, think without writing it down. And he said, oh, that's hypergraphia. He said, a lot of temporal lobe epilepsy patients have it. My patients have it. They bring me their journals. They want me to read them. I don't read them. I just tell them, enjoy them, but I'm not going to read your journals. Virginia's was more loose leaf, just anything that would bear ink or pencil, she would write a poem on, or the cast of the TV show, The Waltons. She had a fangirl obsession with the actor, producer, director, Ron Howard.
Oh, yeah.
And I could tell that everything she watched was kind of wholesome, and he always played wholesome characters.
yeah,
The little boy on
sure,
Andy Griffith,
sure.
the teenager on Happy Days. He never was a bad guy in these films, and I think that's why Virginia loved him so.
Yeah.
But I introduced some of that to the jury, but not before Alvin put me through the hell of telling me I couldn't use any of it. He said, that's all I've got left of her. So we had to do this huge compromise, and ultimately I was paying Alvin for his cooperation in his own case. That's how far the transactionalism got. And I was paying for experts. And all I had to secure myself was a security interest in the dilapidated Zenith shop, which had a refrigerator-sized hole in the roof. it had mud caked in the inside of the floors and the watermarks of a lot of bad weather indoors. And so, but I was excited because now I had the woman that was supposed to have been locked in the basement for 3 decades. She wrote Richard Nixon. She wrote President Richard Milhouse Nixon complaining about getting evicted from public housing. She wrote the TV show. Do you remember the TV show Unsolved Mysteries?
Of course I do. Yeah. Yeah.
She wrote a pitch for Unsolved Mysteries
Wow.
about the taking of Alvin's van. She shared every conspiratorial or paranoid view of government with Alvin. And as a matter of fact, I concluded that I think she was the brain trust behind his litigation. I found
Probably.
glossaries that she would create for him
Yeah.
explaining what these legal terms mean. I don't
Wow.
know if he brought her a book to read it from. I don't know where she got it because there was no internet then, not in their house.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating.
She was no
And
captive.
we started, no captive at all, and was quite the correspondent with congressmen, senators, and presidents.
Hmm.
Alvin insisted on keeping the writings to himself. He did not trust me with them. So that was part of the compromise. Okay, Alvin, I'm going to organize them, but you can keep them. Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
The problem is he would get home every night, he would open up the suitcases, and he would reorganize them. And sometimes he would pull things out that he thought I was too excited about. And so it got very awkward and very we were very having a hard time working together again. And so but I gave in. I said, you can control it. The problem is he would leave the suitcases open at night, and every day he would haul into this tiny windowless courtroom 2 suitcases full of cockroaches. And they began to leave the case and crawl all over the table. Anytime we moved papers around, cockroaches would scramble around. One of the jurors on the Forensic Files show, and your listeners will remember, this is the one called Calligraphy, a play on calligraphy. And the juror, Kimberly Clark Barnes, says on the TV, roaches were crawling out of these suitcases, and I was trying to stomp them and get out of the way. Well, the court finally realized that the judge's office was right next to this courtroom. Maybe we need to get out of this courtroom and, exterminate this one. So he sent us down the hall and across the catwalk to the old Catoosa County courthouse with the grand old courtroom where, and this was the second week of January 1999, but we're going into the same room, which was the last place Virginia Ridley was ever seen alive, September 15, 1970. So for 27 years, between her last appearance in that courtroom and now the appearance of her writings. And quite frankly, it was eerie. To me, and I'm not a real ghost buster or ghost chaser kind of guy, but it was so eerie to reunite those writings with the last significant place Virginia Ridley ever was, other than home.
Yeah.
So that's the crux of the book.
What was the turning point of the case where it looked like it
Well,
was Alvin's favorite?
The turning point, of course, was Flojo's tragic, untimely death gave me an autopsy that I could say, here's a world-class autopsy that says this woman died of a seizure disorder. Now let's compare it to the autopsy of the least known woman of the world, Virginia Ridley. They're extremely close. They're the same type of markings, the same places. If this is a seizure death in Orange County, California, why isn't this a seizure death in Georgia? It's because of the rumors that came with that body to the state crime lab. And after hours and hours on the stand, I finally got the state medical examiner to admit, okay, she could have had a seizure. And that was all the reasonable doubt that we needed.
Yeah.
When I got him to finally admit that. We later learned that the coroner had a dispute with Alvin many years before, where Alvin allegedly attacked her with a broom. Alvin testified, well, I don't think I hit her, but if I did, I wouldn't have hurt her.
Yeah.
And so it was, I want to leave something for the potential reader, that there was a story of two cats, and Kitty and Meowie Ridley, that you've just got to read, because it is a very, it turns out that my little true crime book is really a love story.
Yeah.
About two very odd people that were very much alike in their views of the world. And that's why I'm very pleased that readers with a neurodivergent family member in their home, they are responding extremely well to this book.
Okay.
They said that I handled Alvin with dignity. Well, Alvin had dignity.
Yeah.
His hair was always very nicely done, even for a guy that never took a bath. I didn't know how, but he went to the barbershop.
Yeah.
He was clean shaven every time I ever saw him in those years. And so he carried himself with dignity that I wanted to extend to him.
Yeah.
Out of frustration once, and I reveal it in the book, I was so frustrated with him. And I just kind of lashed out at him. And part of that lashing out was, I said, I wish, please go to the truck stop and take a shower. Well, I immediately felt bad. I don't know why, but I immediately felt bad about saying it. And he just let it just go over his head. He didn't really respond to it. Didn't go take a bath either. But I know now that Alvin doesn't like the sensation of water on his skin. It's a classic neurodivergent issue. My secretary and I will buy him new clothes from Land's End usually, because it's a easy to order catalog, and we'll get him looking pretty snappy. But then he'll wear the same clothes for weeks and weeks and weeks until we strongly suggest that he change.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and that usually means we ordered another box from Land's End. So that Alvin gave me so much. He gave me a second act.
Yeah.
I
can
went
see that.
on to a very long and satisfying and exciting career as a criminal defense lawyer. And Alvin gave me that gift
Good.
because I got politics out of my head finally. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I realized that there are a lot of people, and the call to action for my book here is that there are 5.5 million estimated adults with autism who have never been diagnosed. They are daily having interactions with law enforcement where not being able to process the type of lingo and language that the law enforcement is using, there's going to be some misunderstandings. Like Alvin, there's going to be misjudgments. But at the other end of the process, the lawyer end, lawyers need to be trained on how to work with this client, how to get the information about autism, and how to inform and educate the courts, including jurors. Because I know judges that when they're in a bad mood, and that defendant facing them doesn't want to look them in the eye, or doesn't understand or process exactly what kind of slang they're using when they're saying things, and it comes off as disrespectful, horrible things can happen because of all of this misunderstanding. So I'm hoping that people will read the book. It's truly a love story,
Yeah.
and it's really a weird story of how I was redeemed.
Yes,
Alvin
I
was
can see that.
redeemed by
Yeah.
the jury. I was redeemed in my quests. My father sobered up and came to this trial, the last half of this trial.
Mm,
John, this was the first thing I knew of my father going to sober.
wow.
And that was powerful. That was
Yeah.
powerful fuel for me. Um, he was a wonderful guy. Again, I don't want to characterize him as this, stereotypical Southern drunk in the wearing the wife beater T-shirt.
Mm,
He was a sad alcoholic that it just drove the depression deeper.
yeah.
But he was locked into this trial, just like he locks into the soap operas that he and my mother used to watch after he stopped drinking.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so it was just a
amazing story.
wonderful redemption all around.
Yeah.
Even the congressman who later became a governor for 2 terms, he
Okay.
redeemed himself by making a lot of reform happen for convicted felons. And it was one of those only Nixon could go to China situations. Only
Right, right.
only a Republican could pull that off. Because if I had mentioned it, they would have shot me down as a communist. So he's redeemed, and I thanked him for it. And I said in the acknowledgments, for that reason, I never showed Alvin where he lived.
Wonderful. You are a fabulous storyteller, and you made my
But
job
it's
very, very easy because I was thinking of asking questions, but just stay quiet because you're answering them as I'm thinking them.
Well, it's all true,
Yeah.
and there's so much more. There are other characters, true characters from our community that got involved in this case. Um, and I in my time in the legislature, I was having meetings with at least one future president, and to know them on a name basis, and now I'm at home representing Alvin Ridley
Yeah.
and having a couple of the other kind of odd people in the community. And I took some ridicule. This one judge told me, everybody's saying you deserve each other.
Mm.
And it fueled me. I almost took the case to spite everyone. uh I really felt that maybe you have this guy wrong, and I was hoping and praying that they had him wrong. But by the end of the trial, I was really praying because I didn't know if I had done enough, if I could do enough. And oh, by the way, Jesus appeared to Alvin during lunch one day and told him he had to testify, which went against my initial advice because I did not want the jury to be offended by a guy who wanted to talk about his van being taken more than he wanted to talk about his wife. But as Alvin argued with me, we don't need to talk about my wife because I didn't kill her, but they did take my van. And
Right.
that was his logic.
Yeah.
And so, ultimately it was his call whether to testify or not. And I told him that, but I said, there's ways that you could get up there and open up your um, you could say the wrong thing and it would open the doors, the floodgates for all the odd things that people would think odd of you about. If he put his good character into evidence, rumored bad character could come into the evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the DA was getting it in anyway. He was talking about threats to a deputy. He was talking about threats Alvin allegedly made to the mailman. And I'd never heard that one, nor had I seen it. So it was arguably appealable error to let that in. But I just let Alvin be Alvin. And yes, we talked about the van a lot. But then he spoke so lovingly about his wife when we got to that subject that I thought, man, this guy's doing great. And I thought, I'm going to finish strong. And I forgot the cardinal rule of Alvin. You don't ever ask a question that is not very literal, because he's going to hear every question very literally. But I forgot. And I just wanted to finish strong. And I said, Alvin, tell the jurors what you lost. Just tell them what you lost here. And I wanted him to say, the best friend of my life, the only woman I ever loved. But he said, oh, I guess the funeral bill. The DA went to town.
Oh my
That's all
goodness.
he talked about in his closing, of this cold, callous killer.
Yeah,
You know, all he lost was the funeral bill. Well, now I know it's the autism.
exactly.
And
Was it a surprise, the actual jury's decision? Or was it really like touch and
I
go?
knew I knew that we had gotten that reasonable doubt out of the state's primary witness. But I knew also that the rumor mill was so strong that Alvin's strange, by neurotypical standards, unexpected, unusual behavior was going to be an issue. I just was praying, John. I was praying, real praying.
Wow.
And Alvin and I stand a lot together and look out that courthouse window while we waited for the jury. And I looked down, and there's the courthouse steps that I saw him do his campaign national anthem recording
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And I shared that with him. And then I shared with him that those were the steps that I accepted my 4 victories and conceded my 1 huge defeat on. So the courthouse steps had a real
Yeah.
meaning to both of us. And those were the last place Virginia ever stepped publicly,
Mhm.
up and down those steps. And then ultimately, when the jury acquitted him, we ended up on those steps again to announce to the world that Alvin was a free and innocent man. And I said that day, and it was totally off the cuff, and a man ready to rebuild his reputation in this community. And I'm hoping the book has finally done that. I'll tell you, this town has just warmed up to him so much.
Good.
They come to all of our events. They line up. But Alvin, being and people, your viewers who have neurodiversity in their home and family, they'll recognize where I would get real excited about seeing the next person to get their book signed, because it's a juror, Alvin. It's one of our jurors. Alvin just looks up, puts his head down, and keeps signing his name. And one woman was Virginia, his late wife, whose family hated Alvin. It was a cousin of hers who liked Alvin and who said, I never thought he did it. Virginia didn't want to go home again. She told me she never wanted to go home again. And I thought, where were you 25 years ago? I sure could have used that testimony to make me sleep a little easier at night. But Alvin, again, he's unfazed. We were about to have a Barnes and Noble signing, and I bought him he wanted a hamburger, so I bought him a hamburger at this place called Red Robin, right next to Barnes and Noble. And this server heard what we were there for and what we were about to do, and she came over and just was gushing, and she said, oh, you're about to go sign books. That is so exciting. And Alvin looked at her and said, yeah, I'm real excited. And that's how he said it. And that's kind of how that's Alvin. I don't doubt that he was,
Yeah,
but you're not going to get the guffaws and the
sure.
backslapping and the things that I do.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
that's what I do. That's not what Alvin does.
I can easily picture that. It's quite the story. So how's your book sales doing overall?
Well, unless you're a member of this uh, book scan or something, you don't know real numbers, but I do. I call the Amazon sales rank my dopamine meter
Yeah,
because I'll go out and do like a podcast and I'll watch that rank get, low is good. It's like golf. A low score is good. And I'll watch that rank dip down. And then, after a few days, it kind of edges back up because of other new books in
yeah,
the market and doing their marketing campaigns.
sure.
But I'm heading to Seattle to the Left Coast Crime gathering
Hmm.
where everybody leans in when you go up and say, hey, you want to hear about a murder case? As opposed to the mall where they just run away.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah,
You gotta know your audience.
exactly,
And
exactly.
I usually try to warm up to people before I give them a bookmark and say, and by the way, the bookmarks, I don't think this made it in the book because of copyright issues. Um, I got the local county paper to agree to let me put that article about the Virginia being missing.
Right.
But there's a wonderful tabloid article that I hated at the time, but you can find it on my social media.
Okay.
My Facebook for the book is McCracken Poston Jr. is the name of the Facebook account. The plain McCracken Poston could be my son in Athens, Georgia, or it could be me where I also post book things, but the JR at the end is the one. Twitter is at real Zenith Man. I use that, and the reason I keep showing this book cover is I've already had to deal with 2 artificial intelligence knockoffs of my book
Wow.
on Amazon. I had to like run them off.
Jeez.
And one of them, I even had my name on the cover, but it's at a summary of Zenith Man by McCracken Poston. They didn't have the picture, but when I got Rakuten, the kind of the Amazon of the East, to open it up for me, in that artificial intelligence created version of my book, my name was Rebecca Mitchell.
The world
and
we
so
live in.
I and so I argued. I said, this cannot be a summary of my book
Yeah, yeah,
because I'm clearly not Rebecca Mitchell.
clearly.
And uh, so they knocked them down one at a time. But I knew that I have relatives that would opt for the $4.99 summary version
Sure.
as opposed to getting this book. But it's on audio as well. It's on Kindle. It's on Audible, and what are the other versions? It's got all the versions covered, and
Wonderful.
I've been very flattered again by the reaction of persons with autistic loved ones. I've also been very excited about international readers finding the book and commenting on it. One in England who posted an Amazon review, and one in New Zealand who posted a Goodreads review.
Hmm.
So I would love to hear from your listeners because, again, we all know someone now that's on the spectrum. We
Absolutely.
really all knew people back then, but we just did not know what made them tick.
That's right.
And a lot of times they were just called the town eccentric,
Yeah.
and
Or worse.
or worse. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, McCracken, and we've been talking, or you've been talking for quite a while. The show's called Tell Me About Your Book, and you did exactly that. Thank you very much.
Took you seriously, John.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not much to edit here. Okay. So, I don't know what else to say except, I'm glad that you came
Well,
on the show.
I would love to speak to book clubs. I would love to speak to any group that want to talk about a very interesting case to your listeners. I tell this, just reach out to me. It's a story that I never tire of telling.
Okay.
Now, though, I can get old and start forgetting because it's all in print now.
Well, good. It's a good thing that's the case. All right, McCracken, we'll wrap it up now. And like I said, it was a pleasure having you on and listening to this remarkable story. I'd like to see it in a movie one day.
I'm not going to jinx it.
Okay. All right. You take care of yourself, Nama.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You can also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.